Leonardo da Vinci is, without a doubt, one of the most extraordinary human beings in history. A man whose mind transcended art and science, revolutionizing the way we understand anatomy, mechanics, engineering, and of course, painting. His works have defined the history of art, and his name is tied to some of the most iconic paintings of all time: the Mona Lisa, the Last Supper, the Virgin of the Rocks. However, there is something that sets Da Vinci apart from other great masters. A significant number of his paintings were never finished. Why? What led Leonardo to leave his works incomplete? Was it a matter of perfectionism, lack of time, or simply his restless nature? In today's video, we will delve into Da Vinci's mind and explore the reasons behind his habit of abandoning his paintings. Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo are the two most famous Renaissance artists, known for their numerous unfinished works. However, the contrast in the possible reasons behind their incomplete pieces is striking. Before we begin, let me first make some general observations about how people in the Renaissance might have reacted to the unfinished works of Leonardo and Michelangelo. In their time, it was not acceptable for Renaissance artists to leave a painting, sculpture, or building incomplete if it was intended for a final location. Patrons expected to receive completed works and usually rejected unfinished ones, which, in theory, is how it should be. During the era of Leonardo and Michelangelo, and according to written records of the time, the quality of an unfinished work was described using the adjectives nonfinito or nonfinita. Additionally, other synonymous terms were used, such as incomplete, imperfect, or simply sketched. The notions of nonfinito or incompleteness, in the most canonical sense in which art historians use the term today, are critical concepts that slowly emerged after the mid-16th century, several decades after Leonardo's death. As a term of critical and philosophical discourse, the notion of nonfinito was applied early on, and with great emphasis in the writings of Benedetto Varchi in 1547 and 1564, and Giorgio Vasari in 1568, as they discussed and rationalized why many of Michelangelo's marble sculptures remained in an unfinished or abbozzo state. Continuing with Leonardo, I would like to start with the monumental and incredibly rare unfinished painting of St Jerome in the Wilderness, which is currently housed in the Vatican museums. We will examine this work in greater detail shortly, but I would dare to say that it is the most personal and intensely spiritual devotional painting by Leonardo that has survived. Leonardo began painting St Jerome around 1483, shortly after his arrival in Milan, but he left it unfinished at the time of his death in 1519. We do not know the patron or the general circumstances under which Leonardo produced this painting. However, this work is closely related in style to his two compositions of the Virgin of the Rocks. Just like in the unfinished St. Jerome, monumental caves with dramatic rock formations dominate the compositions of the Virgin of the Rocks. To understand why Leonardo abandoned this painting, we must first discuss his habit of working with extreme meticulousness, which often led him to significantly prolong the completion of his works. There is ample evidence confirming his lengthy working process, but let us focus on a recent discovery that helps us understand why he took so long to finish his paintings. One of the most fascinating advancements in painting studies is infrared reflectography, a modern scientific technique that allows certain non-reflective pigments to become transparent, penetrating beneath the layers of paint down to the gypsum preparation. Thanks to this technology, it is possible to reveal hidden sketches and the different design stages an artist experimented with before reaching the final composition. In the case of the Virgin of the Rocks at the National Gallery in London, infrared reflectography has uncovered a creative process characteristic of Leonardo: multiple revisions and modifications. Evidence shows that he tested several ideas for the arrangement of the figures, painting and repainting over the same panel, layering one solution over another until he arrived at the definitive version we know today. Here, you can see a diagram showing one of the discarded ideas discovered through this analysis. According to historians, this version of the Virgin of the Rocks is linked to a contract signed in 1483 for an altarpiece intended for the Church of San Francesco in Milan. However, the painting was not installed until 1506, suggesting that it remained in progress for approximately 25 years. In fact, some of the preliminary designs that Leonardo experimented with in this painting also appear independently on a sheet of sketches preserved at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. This reinforces the idea that Leonardo not only took a long time to complete his works, but also continuously explored and refined his compositions, leaving behind a visible trail of his relentless pursuit of perfection. Now, I would like us to examine some Renaissance representations of St. Jerome to emphasize the fact that Leonardo's unfinished St. Jerome is a revolutionary depiction of the subject. As you may know, St. Jerome lived between the late 4th and early 5th centuries AD. He was a highly influential Christian theologian, famous for his encyclopedic knowledge of the classics. He is considered one of the 4 Latin fathers of the Church and was the translator of the Bible from Hebrew into Latin, the Vulgate. Medieval and Renaissance artists depicted Saint Jerome in a variety of settings, often with anachronistic attributes. He is frequently shown wearing a cardinal's robes, even though cardinals did not yet exist in his time, as seen in the 2 paintings illustrated here. The 1451 painting by Antonio da Fabriano II portrays Saint Jerome as a scholar with a halo over his cardinal's hat, accompanied by his lion, writing and translating texts in his study. Meanwhile, in this beautiful painting by Antonello da Messina, created between 1460 and 1475, we see a vast Gothic-style room framed by a masonry arch. St. Jerome works at his desk, but his figure appears small in comparison to his surroundings. Although the scene conveys a serene atmosphere, it is filled with fascinating symbols and attributes, while the small lion walks away in the distance. Depictions of St. Jerome as a penitent, praying in the wilderness or in solitude, are also abundant. We can see, for example, Andrea Mantegna's painting from 1449, which portrays St. Jerome both as a scholar and as an ascetic hermit, surrounded by symbols, sitting before a monumental cave. In contrast, Giovanni Bellini's 1460 painting presents St. Jerome at the entrance of a cave in a vividly narrative composition. The saint gestures and appears to be speaking directly to his seated lion, as if they were engaged in conversation. In this other example, the marble narrative relief by Antonio Rossellino, created between 1465 and 1475, depicts a gaunt St. Jerome pointing to the crucifix while holding the stone with which he strikes his chest. Or the painting by Bernardino Pinturicchio from 1475-1480, which shows St. Jerome kneeling before a cave, timidly pointing to his prayer book while holding the stone for self-mortification. These Italian representations of St. Jerome as a penitent in the wilderness come closest to Leonardo's unfinished St. Jerome, as they emphasize his anatomy and ascetic body. However, these scenes appear relatively passive. By contrast, Leonardo's unfinished St. Jerome conveys a dramatic vision of the crucifix. The saint kneels in an extremely compressed pose, yet his arm extends with immense energy. Leonardo draws our attention to the dramatic tension created by the figure's arrested movement with the trained gaze of a scientist who understood the laws of motion. Throughout his career, Leonardo studied the physical mechanics of the human body, breaking down posture sequences into frozen movements. His small theoretical sketches, like the ones you see here, explore the sequences of a man striking with a rock. In the painting, St. Jerome's outstretched arm, holding the stone, appears to have just struck his chest in mortification, though it is also possible that he is about to do so. I'll leave it to you to share your thoughts in the comments. Leonardo also chose to emphasize the intensely intimate spirituality of the scene by omitting all attributes that might seem incongruous in a natural setting. For instance, in this case, there is no cardinal's hat. Instead, Leonardo highlighted a deeply private, mystical moment in St. Jerome's life, in which he is seized by a vision of Christ on the cross, rather than portraying him in his more public role in the history of the Catholic Church. Leonardo depicted St. Jerome as a hermit in the wilderness, drawing partial inspiration from the golden legend of the 13th century. Reclining before the saint is his tamed lion, his faithful companion in the desert and a central figure in his legend. According to the golden legend, St. Jerome removed a thorn from the paw of the wounded lion and healed it, which led the beast to become his devoted companion for life, just as we see in these two Renaissance prints. Leonardo's magnificent design of the lion, seen from behind and forming elegant S-curves with its body and tail, serves as a compositional device that guides us, as viewers, into the painting. The design of the lion not only connects us to the sacred subject of the composition, the mystical St. Jerome, but also helps suggest the depth of pictorial space. In this painting, St. Jerome appears extremely gaunt and almost toothless. He is caught in a trance-like state as he prays, and this close-up of St. Jerome's face shows how Leonardo first created shadows and contours using a pale bluish-grey color, and then reinforced them with firmer brown lines. The unfinished state of Leonardo's St. Jerome offers an invaluable insight into his creative process. We can observe the artist's ideas at the precise moment of their evolution. Before we continue with the video, I'd like to take a few seconds to invite you to check out the link in the description once you finish watching. There, you'll find a catalogue of carefully selected artworks that you can collect for your home. You can purchase your favorite piece to keep for a lifetime, and the best part is that shipping is free worldwide. I've personally selected over 500 artworks, and there's even a special collection dedicated exclusively to Da Vinci, featuring his greatest masterpieces. If you've already placed an order in the store, thank you. It's because of you that I can continue making these videos. So if you'd like to support the channel, I invite you to place your order once you finish watching. Now, let's continue. As I mentioned earlier, Leonardo was famous in his time for working slowly and for failing to complete his projects, especially his paintings. Contemporary records show that this habit often frustrated his patrons. The incomplete nature of the painting confirms that Leonardo did not work in a disciplined manner. Rather, he selected and prioritized the aspects that interested him the most. As a result, the execution of the painting is quite uneven. In large areas of the composition, we see only the gesso background preparation on the wooden panel, or merely the earliest design layers, quickly outlined with a brush in bluish-grey and brown tones. However, in other parts of the painting, Leonardo worked with remarkable attention to detail, particularly in the saint's head, neck, and shoulders. Leonardo was particularly interested in creating an anatomically precise design for St. Jerome's ascetic body. His right arm is essentially just sketched with lines over the background preparation, whereas the saint's lower right leg is modeled with striking three-dimensionality. Yet, some sections of the torso remain in deep shadow and are relatively undefined. Leonardo applied color primarily in the upper left section of the composition, where traces of greenish-blue pigments can be seen. A detailed examination of the painting's surface reveals not only Leonardo's brushstrokes, but also the presence of his fingerprints in the upper left sections of the composition. Leonardo used his brush, his fingers, and occasionally the palm of his hand to distribute pigments and create a soft focus effect in the sky and landscape in the upper left portion of the painting. St. Jerome, immersed in a state of ecstasy, directs his gaze toward the crucifix, which is only faintly outlined inside the cave on the right side of the painting, near the edge of the composition. Leonardo also sketched the crucifix in a side view, making it particularly difficult to interpret. Within the monumental cave, to the left of the crucifix, Leonardo outlined the contours of a religious building. The architectural style of this church resembles the facade of Santa Maria Novella in Florence, designed by Leon Battista Alberti. As Leonardo continued developing St. Jerome in the late 1480s and early 1490s, he was also deepening his anatomical studies. Here we can see a schematic drawing of the human circulatory system created by Leonardo. Alongside his anatomical research, the artist explored the challenges of human proportion. On the right, you can see his famous drawing of the Vitruvian Man, created around 1492, which represents the harmony of human proportions. For Leonardo, knowledge, geometry, proportion, and anatomy were deeply interconnected. As a theorist of painting, Leonardo repeatedly emphasized that the two greatest challenges for a skilled painter were the representation of the human figure and the expression of emotions and thoughts, which manifested through the body's capacity for gesture. Leonardo worked on the unfinished St Jerome during the years when he was most passionately investigating the location of the soul within the human body. St Jerome's face and gestures convey Leonardo's revolutionary theories on human physiognomy and the psychology of expression. By the late 1480s, Leonardo had begun to develop his anatomical research, partly based on dissection, alongside his theories on gesture. According to Leonardo, the external gestures of the face and body communicated what he called the movements of the mind and passions of the soul, terms he described at various times as passioni dell'anima, moti mentali, and affetti mentali. In his unfinished writings, executed between 1493 and 1498, his mural of the Last Supper represents his theories on expression and passioni dell'anima with profound meaning and a great variety of gestures. Leonardo continued working on St. Jerome throughout the late 1480s and 1490s, while his experimental anatomical research also led him to reflect on the human soul. Leonardo's 1489 anatomical studies of the human skull reflect his exploration of the theory of sensus communis, or common sense, which, according to beliefs of his time, was the seat of the soul. Leonardo considered the sensus communis to be the convergence of human mental and imaginative faculties, physically located in the internal ventricle of the brain. According to the Aristotelian and Galenic traditions of his era, the geometric center of the head was believed to be where the soul resided. In this drawing, Leonardo represented an architectural cross-section of the human skull, illustrating the location of the sensus communis at its perfect geometric center. This reflects Leonardo's complex understanding of anatomy, geometry, and their relationship to spiritual and intellectual concepts. We know a great deal about Leonardo's library thanks to an inventory of his books titled Reminder of Books Left Locked in the Large Chests, recorded between 1503 and 1505 in the Madrid Codex II. This list includes about 116 books, many of which can still be identified today. Most of these books were printed editions in Italian rather than the original Latin texts. For example, one of the books Leonardo owned was an Aristotelian manual on the immortality of the soul by Fra Jacopo Canfora da Genova, titled Della immortalità dell'anima. This text mentions the passioni dell'anima, the emotions and movements of the mind, terms that Leonardo adopted and expanded within his own theoretical framework. Leonardo radically transformed popular Aristotelian notions by attempting to visualize the human mind in terms of physical anatomy. On the left, you can see a diagram from a compendium of Aristotelian texts by Johann Lindner of Monchberg, now housed in the Wellcome Institute Library in London. This diagram presents a rudimentary representation of the brain, with red ink indicating the location of the 5 mental faculties: sensus communis, common sense; imaginatio, imagination; fantasia, fantasy; cogitatio, thought; and memoria, memory. Although Leonardo did not directly study this manuscript, its ideas circulated widely among 15th century scholars. By comparison, Leonardo's anatomical representations, seen on the right, are remarkably superior in accuracy, depicting the brain, cerebral ventricles, and cranial nerves with a high level of realism. The expressive power of St. Jerome's gestures lies in the high degree of anatomical naturalism with which Leonardo modeled the saint's head, neck, and chest. Leonardo's theoretical writings emphasize that painting should move the viewer with an emotional intensity equal to that of the scene's protagonists. This awareness of the viewer's active participation in the interpretation of a painting functions as a fundamental device in most of Leonardo's pictorial compositions, especially in the Mona Lisa. Now, I would like us to shift our perspective and reflect on the broader issue of the unfinished state in Leonardo's work, beyond his St. Jerome in the Wilderness. As you may recall, there is extensive evidence that Leonardo's patrons expected completed works from him. The notion of nonfinito as a positive quality did not emerge until the mid-16th century, several decades after Leonardo's death, when critics began associating it with Michelangelo's unfinished sculptures. Leonardo's greatest strength lay in his process of inventing compositions. He was deeply connected to the phase of creative exploration, where the frenzied flow of ideas remained in constant evolution. He believed in the total mutability of ideas, both in the artist's mind and on the working surface, without the need to commit to a final version. For this reason, Leonardo produced countless preparatory sketches on paper, many of which emphasized the spontaneity and dynamism of figure movement. A key example of this approach is his large unfinished painting, The Adoration of the Magi, now housed in the Uffizi Gallery. This altarpiece was commissioned by the Augustinian monks of San Donato in Scopeto in 1481, but was never completed. We can compare Leonardo's unfinished Adoration of the Magi with an early unfinished painting by Michelangelo, the Manchester Madonna, located in the National Gallery in London. In stark contrast to Michelangelo's work, Leonardo's Adoration of the Magi conveys the fluidity of emerging ideas. Leonardo conceived the composition in a schematic manner with an organic sense of the whole, whereas Michelangelo developed his painting figure by figure, progressing methodically from right to left. In the Manchester Madonna, the two young figures to the left of the Virgin remain unfinished, with large areas of white gesso preparation visible. These unfinished figures were painted in terra verde, a green pigment traditionally used as an underlayer for flesh tones. In contrast, the neighboring figures are nearly fully developed in color and modeling. If we look more closely at Leonardo's Adoration of the Magi, we can note that it was meticulously cleaned between 2013 and 2017 at the conservation laboratories of the Opificio delle Pietre Dure in Florence. Over the centuries, previous restorers had applied thick layers of varnish over the entire surface of the painting in an attempt to unify the unfinished areas. These varnish layers were largely removed during the recent restoration. Although the painting remains in an unfinished state, similar to a sketch on the wooden panel, it is now evident that Leonardo began adding color in certain areas while calibrating the overall tonal balance of the composition. For instance, he developed the sky using pale blue pigments which had been obscured under layers of opaque brownish tones before the cleaning process. Both the unfinished Adoration of the Magi and St. Jerome in the Wilderness offer similar examples of Leonardo's working method, one that was rather free and undisciplined. In both paintings, Leonardo began adding color in different sections while continuing to adjust and refine the composition in terms of tone and form. In the infrared reflectography scan of the Adoration of the Magi, numerous details become visible that cannot be seen with the naked eye, such as laborers who appear to be constructing what seems to be the Temple of Jerusalem. As you may recall, infrared reflectography allows for deep penetration into non-reflective pigments, revealing the underlying preparatory drawing. Leonardo's paper sketches reveal the extent to which he contemplated the animation of figure gestures. He constantly altered and refined his ideas, rethinking the arrangement and movement of the characters. The large number of figures and the ever-changing state of the design suggest that one of the main reasons Leonardo left this altarpiece unfinished was that his design process remained in perpetual evolution. The painting became uncontrollable, with no definitive idea ever fully established on the surface. Leonardo's extensive theoretical writings help us understand the role of creative imagination and the importance of exploratory sketches in his working method. For example, his sketch sheet of the Virgin adoring the Child, related to the Virgin of the Rocks, presents at least 4 alternative ideas for an altarpiece. At the bottom center of the sheet, we can see 3 additional studies of the movements of the infant Christ. Leonardo explored various possibilities for the gestures of the Virgin and Child, articulating his ideas through a visual language of abbreviated notations. His monumental written legacy on painting theory and narrative composition was revolutionary. His writings on quick sketches and the role of creative imagination are arguably the most innovative from a historical perspective. In these writings, Leonardo recognized and sought to verbalize the role of the conscious, semi-conscious, and unconscious mind in the creative process. Florentine humanists and educated artists of Leonardo's time were familiar with both ancient and contemporary literature on the power of sketches, imagination, and the creative energy that could be perceived in an unfinished work. One of the most influential classical texts was Natural History by Pliny the Elder, a book Leonardo owned around 1493 to 1495. We know Leonardo possessed this book because he mentioned the Italianized name of the author, Plinio, in his book inventory, indicating that his copy was an Italian translation by Cristoforo Landino, titled Historia Naturale di Plinio II, printed in Venice in 1476 and later editions. Pliny documented key examples of rapid execution and technical virtuosity in ancient painting. One of the most celebrated cases is that of Apelles and his unfinished Venus, which, in its sketched state, was more admired than his completed masterpiece of the goddess. Leonardo was also well versed in the theories on painting by Leon Battista Alberti, who advised painters to work with spontaneity, recommending an approach of quick yet skillful execution, prestezza con diligenza, swiftness with diligence. Leonardo's theoretical descriptions of drawing and sketching offer an unprecedented level of empirical and reflective detail. His ideas on compositional sketching matured in the notes of Manuscript A, a text dedicated to drafting his unfinished treatise on painting. In these notes, Leonardo reflected on the role of imagination in the creative process. I quote, "I cannot refrain from mentioning among these precepts a new method for imagination, which, although it may seem trivial and almost laughable, is extremely useful for stimulating the mind toward various inventions. This consists of observing stained surfaces, irregularly patterned stones, or clouds. In them, if one must invent a scene, they will find similarities to landscapes full of mountains, rivers, rocks, trees, plains, valleys, and hills arranged in various ways. They may also see battles, figures in motion, strange faces, and garments, in short, an infinite variety of things that can be refined into well-defined forms." As an artist, Leonardo felt most comfortable in the continuum of the creative process, where multiple visual ideas could coexist in a state of perpetual gestation within the artist's imagination. His artistic method emphasized an intuitive response to abstract forms and accidental stains, representing a major breakthrough in the history of creativity. After the initial phase of invention, Leonardo refined the dynamic arrangement of figures through scientific studies of light and shadow. In his sketches and many of his unfinished paintings, this exploratory phase seems to have become the final state of the work. The ongoing influence of Pliny's Natural History on Leonardo's theoretical and practical ideas was significant. It is likely that his conception of the famous fragmentary painting known as La Scapigliata, the disheveled one, was inspired by Apelles' unfinished Venus, mentioned by Pliny. In its barely sketched state, this painting became an exercise in technical virtuosity that highlights Leonardo's spontaneity and fluidity of brushwork. In 2009, a fundamental discovery was made, a marginal note written by Agostino Vespucci in an early printed book dated October 1503. This note briefly mentions Leonardo and states, "Just as Apelles left his Venus unfinished, so too does Leonardo da Vinci with all his paintings, such as the head of Lisa del Giocondo and a Virgin with the Child. We shall see what he does with the Great Council, a commission for which he has already signed a contract with the Gonfalonier." Vespucci's comment references three works by Leonardo: Saint Anne, the Mona Lisa, the Battle of Anghiari. All of them were in progress at the time. The most important aspect of the Vespucci note is that it provides a precise date for the beginning of the Mona Lisa, definitively resolving the debate over the model's identity. It confirms that the model was Lisa Gherardini, wife of Francesco del Giocondo. Although Leonardo began the Mona Lisa in 1503, the painting remained in his studio as a work in progress for a long time. In fact, Leonardo never delivered the painting to his patron and kept it with him until at least 1517, likely until his death. Infrared reflectography scans reveal substantial changes in the underdrawing of the Mona Lisa as Leonardo refined the composition. For instance, the detail of the Mona Lisa's hands resting on the chair's arm, when observed under infrared reflectography, shows that the figure originally had smaller proportions. The background of the painting still presents many unfinished areas with unresolved details. 16th century authors attempted to explain Leonardo's tendency to leave his paintings unfinished in various ways, often focusing on material or technical aspects of his work. However, the issue of the unfinished in Leonardo extends beyond the purely tangible. As a theorist, Leonardo firmly stated that all disciplines were based on mathematical principles. His obsession with geometry, particularly transformational geometry, shaped his thinking from the mid-1490s until his death. His study of algebra and geometry led him to reflect on infinity, transformation processes, and limitless divisibility. In his notes for a treatise on transformational geometry, titled De Ludo Geometrico, Leonardo explored the properties of continuous quantity in geometry. Over the years, Leonardo's theoretical vocabulary on painting began to incorporate mathematical and geometrical terms. He spoke of the indivisibility of space, infinite atmospheric effects, the endless nature of perspectival projection, and the continuous subdivision of lines. The Virgin and Child with Saint Anne, housed in the Louvre, represents the culmination of Leonardo's theoretical and pictorial practice. This work remained in progress for over a decade, even during Leonardo's years in France. In this painting, Leonardo achieved infinitely subtle effects of color, light, and sfumato. The sacred figures sublimely express the passions of the soul, passioni dell'anima, through the rhythmic harmony of their gestures, in accordance with his theory of painting. Few artists have influenced the history of painting as profoundly as Leonardo da Vinci. His ceaseless pursuit of perfection, his experimental approach, and his visionary understanding of light, movement, and expression left a legacy that continues to captivate and inspire. While his unfinished works may have frustrated his patrons, they offer us an unparalleled glimpse into the mind of one of the greatest geniuses in history. An artist for whom the creative process itself was more important than the finished product. Thank you for watching the video until the end. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next video. I also invite you to place your order at inspiragio.com and follow me on my social media. See you in the next video.